The words hung in the air, sharp and irreversible. "You're a burden to our family." My daughter's voice, trembling with anger, sliced through the noise of forks scraping plates and glasses clinking. For a moment, no one moved. My husband's hand froze halfway to his mouth. My son stared at his lap, cheeks burning, pretending not to hear. I felt my own breath catch, as if my body refused to let in more air. All the years I had spent holding this family together, scheduling appointments, staying up late waiting for them to come home, patching up arguments, collapsed into that single accusation. My mind searched for a reply, something to defend myself or at least demand an explanation. But nothing came. The silence was louder than her words. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The legs scraped the floor, a sound that made everyone flinch. I didn't look at anyone as I walked out, each step heavy, deliberate, final. The hallway felt longer than usual, the framed photos on the wall blurring as I passed. I reached the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled in my lap. I tried to remember the last time I had felt truly seen by my family, not as the person who kept things running, but as someone with needs, frustrations, and dreams of her own. In the quiet, memories surfaced. My daughter, as a child, running to me with scraped knees and tearful eyes, trusting I could fix anything. When had that trust turned to resentment? I replayed the dinner in my mind, searching for the moment things had gone wrong. Was it the way I reminded her about her grades, the questions about her friends, or was it something deeper, a slow accumulation of disappointments neither of us had ever named? The silence of the house pressed in, broken only by muffled voices from the kitchen. I knew they were talking about me, deciding what to do next, but I couldn't bring myself to care. For the first time in years, I let myself feel the weight of my own exhaustion. I thought about leaving, just walking out the front door and not looking back. The idea was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I imagined what life might look like if I put myself first for once. Mornings without obligations, evenings spent reading or walking alone, the freedom to make choices without considering everyone else's needs. But guilt crept in, stubborn and familiar. I had built my identity around being needed. If I wasn't the caretaker, who was I? The question lingered, uncomfortable and unresolved. The door creaked open. My husband's voice was tentative. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how to explain the ache in my chest, the sense of betrayal that felt to Rod a share. He sat beside me, keeping his distance. "She didn't mean it," he said. But I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Maybe she did. Maybe they all did, in ways they couldn't admit. I stared at my hands, wishing I could shrink into myself and disappear. He tried again. "We're all under a lot of stress. Maybe we should talk about this." I shook my head. Talking felt impossible. I needed space, not solutions. He left quietly, closing the door behind him. Alone again, I let the tears come, silent and hot. I thought about my own mother, how she had endured so much without complaint. I wondered if she had ever felt this invisible, this unappreciated. The thought made me ache for her, and for the version of myself I had lost somewhere along the way. I stayed in the room for hours, ignoring the sounds of the family moving on without me. At some point, my son knocked softly, sliding a note under the door. "I'm sorry." It read in his careful handwriting. I pressed the paper to my chest, grateful for the small gesture, but it didn't erase the hurt. I knew things had changed. The words my daughter had spoken couldn't be unsaid. They had exposed a truth I had tried to ignore. I was tired of carrying everyone else's burdens. I wanted someone to carry mine, just for a little while. That night, I lay awake, replaying the scene over and over. I wondered if my daughter regretted what she had said, or if she felt justified. I wondered if my husband would ever truly understand how alone I felt. Most of all, I wondered if I had the strength to demand more for myself, to stop accepting so little in return for everything I gave. As dawn approached, I made a quiet promise. I would not let myself disappear. Not anymore. The first step would be the hardest, but it was time to take it. The morning after I left the dinner table, the house felt different. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden reconciliation, just a quiet tension that seeped into every room. I moved through the motions, making coffee, straightening the living room, gathering laundry, but everything felt mechanical, as if I were a guest in my own home. My daughter's words echoed in my mind, relentless and sharp. I wondered if she regretted them or if she even understood their weight. My husband avoided my gaze, his silence a fragile shield against further conflict. My son lingered in the hallway, glancing at me with a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. Unsure whether to approach or keep his distance, I replayed the dinner scene, searching for the moment when things had truly begun to unravel. It wasn't just about that night. The signs had been there for months: snapped replies, missed family outings, the growing distance between us. I had ignored them, hoping that if I worked harder, if I was more patient, things would return to normal. Now, I realized how much I had sacrificed in the name of keeping the peace. My needs had become invisible, buried beneath everyone else's demands. As the day unfolded, I found myself questioning everything. Was I really a burden, or was I simply exhausted from years of putting myself last? I thought about the roles we all played. My husband, the silent provider. My daughter, the rebellious teenager desperate for independence. My son, the peacemaker caught in the crossfire. Each of us carried our own scars, shaped by disappointments and unspoken expectations. The family had become a collection of individuals, each isolated by their own struggles. My daughter stayed in her room, the door closed, music leaking through the walls. I considered knocking, but the memory of her accusation stopped me. I worried that any attempt at conversation would only make things worse. Instead, I focused on small tasks, trying to reclaim a sense of control. I called my sister, hoping for comfort, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to admit how lost I felt, how much I needed someone to tell me I wasn't alone. Mid-afternoon, my husband finally spoke. "We should talk," he said, his voice careful. I nodded, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. The conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and half-formed sentences. He admitted he hadn't noticed how overwhelmed I'd become. "I thought you were managing," he said. I wanted to scream that managing wasn't the same as living, that I was tired of being the glue holding everything together while my own needs went unmet. He apologized, but his words felt hollow. Apologies couldn't erase years of neglect, nor could they fix the growing gap between us. I realized then that I needed more than words. I needed change. I told him I needed space, time to figure out who I was outside the roles of wife and mother. He looked hurt, but he didn't argue. Maybe he understood, or maybe he was just as lost as I was. Later, my son slipped into the room, his eyes wide with worry. "Are you mad at us?" he whispered. I shook my head, pulling him close. "I'm just tired," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded, not pressing for more. I wondered if he sensed the truth, that I was tired of being invisible, tired of carrying everyone's burdens without anyone noticing my own. As evening approached, the house settled into uneasy silence. I sat alone in the living room, the television flickering in the background. My daughter emerged briefly, grabbing a snack without meeting my eyes. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between us, but I didn't know how. The hurt was too fresh, the words too raw. I thought about what it would take to heal, not just for myself but for the whole family. We needed honesty, the kind that risked more pain but promised real connection. We needed to stop pretending everything was fine, to acknowledge the ways we had failed each other. Most of all, I needed to find the courage to demand more for myself, for my children, for the life I wanted to reclaim. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a silent vow. I would not let my daughter's words define me. I would not shrink into the background, waiting for someone else to notice my pain. Tomorrow, I would start the hard work of rebuilding not just the family, but myself. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling. Every routine breakfast, school runs, the quiet hours before everyone returned became a test of endurance. My daughter and I circled each other, careful not to touch the raw edge exposed. At dinner, she left early, came home late, and when we crossed paths, our exchanges were clipped, polite, almost as if we were strangers forced to share a space. My husband kept his distance, offering practical gestures, but little comfort. My son, sensing the tension, retreated into his own world. The house was quieter than ever, but beneath that quiet, emotions churned. I spent hours replaying the moment. She called me a burden. The word echoed in my mind, reshaping memories, making me question every choice I'd made as a mother. I wondered if I had failed her, or if she simply needed someone to blame for her own frustrations. I tried to remind myself that families fracture under pressure, that stress can twist love into something unrecognizable. Still, the pain lingered. I moved through the day with a heaviness I couldn't shake, caught between anger and sorrow. One afternoon, I sat in the kitchen while my son finished his homework. He looked up, searching my face. "Are you and Emma going to be okay?" he asked quietly. His question cut through my defenses. I wanted to reassure him, to promise that everything would return to normal, but I couldn't lie. "I hope so," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, accepting my uncertainty, and went back to his work. I realized then how deeply the conflict had seeped into every part of our lives. It wasn't just between me and my daughter. It had unsettled the whole family. That evening, I found myself alone in the living room, staring at the family photos. On the wall, I saw birthdays, vacations, moments when we all seemed happy. I wondered if those memories were real, or if I had simply convinced myself that we were closer than we actually were. I thought about my own parents, how they had handled conflict by swallowing their pain, keeping up appearances, never admitting when things were falling apart. I didn't want to repeat their mistakes, but I also didn't know how to break the cycle. The next day, I called my sister again. This time, I told her everything. She listened without judgment, letting me pour out my fears and regrets. "You're not a burden," she said firmly. "You're allowed to feel hurt. You're allowed to want more." Her words offered a small measure of comfort, but they didn't erase the ache. I knew that healing would take more than reassurance. It would take honesty, not just with my family, but with myself. I began to notice how each of us was coping in our own way. My husband worked longer hours, escaping into his job. My son withdrew, spending more time with friends or lost in video games. My daughter became more distant, her anger simmering just below the surface. We were all trying to manage the stress, but instead of coming together, we drifted further apart. I read about families under strain, how burnout can make even the strongest bonds feel fragile, how everyone starts to doubt their role and their worth. I recognized the signs in my own home: the exhaustion, the avoidance, the sense that no one knew how to fix what was broken. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my daughter appeared in the doorway. She hesitated, then spoke. "I didn't mean what I said," she mumbled, eyes fixed on the floor. Relief and sadness washed over me in equal measure. I wanted to embrace her, to tell her that everything was forgiven, but I also needed her to understand the impact of her words. "It hurt," I replied, my voice steady. "I need you to know that." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. For a moment, the distance between us shrank. We talked, haltingly at first, about the pressures she felt: school, friends, the weight of expectations. She admitted she lashed out because she felt overwhelmed and didn't know how to ask for help. I listened, resisting the urge to offer solutions. I realized that for years, I had tried to fix everything, to smooth over every conflict. But sometimes what we need most is to be heard. Our conversation was messy and incomplete, but it was a start. After she left, I sat in the quiet, feeling a shift inside me. The pain was still there, but so was a new sense of resolve. I couldn't control how my family responded to stress, but I could choose how I responded. I could set boundaries, ask for support, and refuse to carry more than my share. I could model honesty and vulnerability, even if it meant risking more conflict. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since that night at dinner, I felt something close to hope. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what it meant to rebuild trust. It wouldn't happen overnight. There would be setbacks, moments when old habits resurfaced. But I was determined to keep going, to fight for the family I wanted, not just the one I had. I promised myself that I would not let pain define our story. I would keep reaching out, even when it hurt, because lasting love was worth the effort. The following week brought a fragile sense of possibility, but also new challenges. The conversation with my daughter had opened something between us, yet it hadn't erased the tension that lingered in the house. Each day, we tested the boundaries of this uneasy truce. My husband and I exchanged more words than before, but they were cautious, as if we were both afraid to say the wrong thing. My son watched us all, searching for signs that the family he knew was still intact. One evening, as I prepared dinner, my daughter hovered nearby, clearly wanting to talk but unsure how to begin. I set down the knife, wiped my hands, and waited. She finally spoke, her voice hesitant. "I've been thinking about what I said. I know I hurt you. I feel like I'm drowning sometimes, and I don't know how to ask for help." Her admission was raw, and I felt a surge of empathy. For so long, I had believed I was the only one overwhelmed by the weight of expectations. Now I saw that each of us was struggling in our own way, isolated by pride and fear. I reached for her hand. "We all feel lost sometimes," I said quietly. "But we can't help each other if we keep pretending everything's fine." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I realized that this was the first time in years she had let herself be vulnerable with me. I wanted to hold on to that moment, to protect it from the chaos that so often swept through our lives. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the darkened living room, thinking about what it would take to truly heal. Apologies were a beginning, but they weren't enough. We needed to change how we lived together, how we communicated, how we supported one another. I thought about my own upbringing, the way my parents had avoided conflict, and how that avoidance had shaped me. I didn't want to pass that legacy on to my children. The next day, I called a family meeting. My voice shook as I explained why we needed to talk. "We can't keep going like this," I said. "We're all hurting, and we need to find a way forward." My husband looked uncomfortable, my son anxious, my daughter guarded. Still, they listened. I told them how I felt tired, invisible, desperate for support. I asked them to share their own feelings, even if it was difficult. At first, there was silence. Then my husband spoke, admitting that he had retreated into work because he didn't know how to help. My son confessed he felt responsible for keeping the peace, afraid that any misstep would make things worse. My daughter, voice trembling, said she felt pressure to be perfect, to meet expectations she didn't fully understand. The honesty was painful, but it was also a relief. For the first time, we were acknowledging the fractures instead of hiding them. We talked late into the night, voices rising and falling, sometimes heated, sometimes tender. There were tears, apologies, and moments of awkward laughter. We didn't solve everything, but we agreed to try to check in with each other, to ask for help, to be honest about our needs. We promised to stop letting silence fill the spaces where words should be. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Small gestures made a difference: a shared meal, a note left on the counter, a hug in the hallway. My daughter started spending more time at home. My husband made an effort to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. My son seemed lighter, less burdened by the tension that had weighed on him for so long. I found myself rediscovering parts of myself I had neglected. I took walks alone, read books I had set aside, reached out to friends I had lost touch with. I realized that in order to care for my family, I needed to care for myself. It wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I began to set boundaries, to say no when I needed rest, to ask for help without guilt. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, my daughter looked at me and said, "I'm glad you didn't give up on us." Her words were simple, but they meant everything. I smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. We were still a family, bruised but not broken, learning how to love each other better. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, I believed we could make it. We had faced the hardest truths and survived. Now, together, we could begin to heal. The weeks after our family meeting marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by the absence of conflict, but by a willingness to face it together. We had acknowledged our pain, but now came the real work: rebuilding trust, nurturing understanding, and creating a home where each of us felt seen and valued. Progress was gradual and sometimes uneven, but it was real. We started by establishing new routines, small but meaningful changes that signaled our commitment to each other. Family dinners became a space for honest conversation, not just a daily obligation. At first, the discussions were awkward, but over time, we learned to listen without interrupting, to share without fear of judgment. My husband and I agreed to regular check-ins, moments set aside to talk openly about our feelings and frustrations. These check-ins became anchors, helping us navigate the inevitable stresses of daily life and preventing old patterns from resurfacing. 5. My daughter and I worked to rebuild our relationship one conversation at a time. She began to confide in me about her struggles at school and with friends, and I resisted the urge to immediately offer solutions. Instead, I listened, validating her feelings and letting her know she was not alone. There were setbacks, days when tempers flared or misunderstandings rose, but we approached these moments with a new sense of patience. We had learned that healing was not about erasing the past, but about creating space for growth and forgiveness. 5. We also embraced the importance of self-care, both individually and as a family. I started taking time for myself without guilt, reading, walking, reconnecting with friends. My husband found solace in gardening, and my son joined a local sports team. Discovering joy in teamwork and camaraderie, we encouraged each other to pursue activities that brought us peace and fulfillment, recognizing that our well-being was interconnected. 17. Family therapy became a cornerstone of our recovery. Guided by a compassionate therapist, we explored the roots of our conflicts and practiced new ways of communicating. We learned to set healthy boundaries, to express our needs clearly, and to respect each other's independence. 5. These sessions were not always easy. Old wounds resurfaced, and emotions sometimes ran high, but they offered a safe space to confront our fears and hopes. Through therapy, we developed a deeper understanding of each other's experiences and began to see ourselves, not just as individuals, but as parts of a resilient whole. 53. Celebrating small victories became a tradition. We marked progress with family outings, shared meals, and simple moments of laughter. Each milestone, no matter how minor, was a reminder of how far we had come. We learned to appreciate the effort behind every apology, every act of kindness, every attempt to reconnect. These celebrations reinforced our unity and gave us the strength to keep moving forward. 5. As the months passed, our home felt lighter. The tension that once defined our interactions gave way to a sense of stability. We still faced challenges, stress at work, disagreements over chores, the pressures of everyday life, but we faced them together, equipped with new tools and a renewed sense of purpose. We understood that setbacks were inevitable, but they no longer threatened to unravel us. Instead, they became opportunities to practice empathy, patience, and resilience. 8. Looking back, I saw how much we had all changed. My daughter was more open, my husband more present, my son more confident, and I, too, had grown, no longer defined by exhaustion or invisibility, but by a quiet strength. I had learned to ask for help, to set boundaries, to trust that my needs mattered. Our family was not perfect, but we were stronger, bound by honesty and hope. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, my daughter reached for my hand. "Thank you for not giving up on us," she said softly. Her words echoed the promise I had made to myself months before, to never let pain define our story. In that moment, I realized we had created something lasting, a foundation built on understanding, forgiveness, and love. We were, and always would be, a work in progress. But we were moving forward, together, ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at home, not just in our house, but in myself.